Stillborn to Life, a novella by Valerie Stevens. Chapter 14. What is it about the darkness which makes me feel so free? Or perhaps, what is it about me? Why do I seem to be so crippled by the contradictorial commands of my day, while others seem to be so empowered by them? Or perhaps they are merely fulfilling an equivalence principle of their own, and thus must their petty torments and fascistic entrapments be felt equally commensurate to the Dantean depths and Icarian heights of a need and hope for their final recompense and absolution. And yet still I am also all too sentiently aware of the dictatorships forged in the absence of vagary, yet the full presence of freedom. Yet as is the course of most human affairs, whatever nature of orders are given, I respond with thrice more, feeling that any authority not rightfully granted to that of my own self-governance is the very means by which I must follow my own internal dictates. For blind obeisance requires its own massive reserves of energy, leaving very little for those pursuits truly noble and courageous. Yet so often I am left with nothing to show for my valiant struggles, making revolt thus seem abashedly dull and arbitrary. Hence the problems and questions posed were very clear to me, despite the faithful ambiguity of their solutions and answers. And the main dilemma was how to surrender without giving in. Again, the age-old epic battle between survival and thrivance, growth versus stagnation. For life and its failure or success are directly commensurate, it seems, with a trick of constant measure. Its scales reading like some dyskryptic, enticingly but painfully facile codex, more being less, less being more, and still the spaces there in between, determining fortune or catastrophe. For in truth, equitability is abomination, a perversity born of the acidic, hostile womb and writhing limbs of that malleable, fallible entity of all human vitiation and puerile imaginings. For oh, what terrible webs our minds do weave when first we practice to believe. For belief is soon revealed to be merely the portent of assured incredulity and repudiation. Thus, perhaps only the nihilists of any culture are truly christened for greatness. For at least, despite how contrary or even depraved they might be, they know enough to leave a light on for those kinds of epiphanous revelation, parthenogenically born from the barren yet fertile egg they know nothing of mind. And the nihilist also bears just enough objective indifference to favor neither question nor answer, and in their aimlessness finds clearer direction and more steadfast resolve. And paradoxically so, it is in their wealth of despair that they can afford to buy out the indigence of that inscience smugly masquerading as prescience, thus finding true exaltation and enlightenment. And the nihilist, through his artless godlessness and apostasy, finds true salvation, and through his atheistic zeal may even come closer to God. He finds with such abundance because he does not seek, for he knows all too well that he already possesses everything he needs within himself. And the self-professed man of God, filled with blind piety, who seeks so desperately for that which he never lost to begin with, an even greater loss finds him, paralyzing him with a cataclysmic grief unlike anything he has ever known until the end of his days. And the more he tries to remember, the more slowly and painfully he forgets. And it is past this very point that he, the self-righteous believer, has become that dreaded world without being. Implosion soon occurs, the force of which neither the deepest nor loftiest dwellings could offer reprieve. And once again, that thing least expected to grant his salvation from complete self-annihilation manifests itself, and it turns out to be none other than the crafty but wise counsel of the nihilist. Yet still, even after all this, remains that hunger for hunger, that thirst for thirst, that hunger for thirst, thirst for hunger. And it is this very hunger which taunts and persecutes man with the most acute, unceasing pangs. Perhaps the Eastern mystics are right about desire being at the root of all suffering. But I would dare posit even further and declare that it is not desire in and of itself which inflicts, but a world which denies its satiety. This is some of the wisdom I had gained upon entering my second year of graduate school. And once I began to reawaken intellectually, did my creativity soon return with a prolific flourish. I began some sculpting, and as my name had become well respected in certain circles due to some art shows I had put on, I sold my first sculpture to a bank for them to display in their lobby. My studies were flowing just as naturally as always due to my inborn scholarly nature, and my grades were above average. The only mark below an A that I had been given was on an intern paper, which I will admit was a bit too radical even for my free-thinking anthropology professor. He jokingly referred to this paper as an anarchist manifesto. I found that rather amusing myself, as I had not intended this. In the paper, I argued how non-resistance to the natural way of all things, including human nature, would ultimately contribute to the higher good of any society in the world at large. I also strongly included in this hypothesis how resistance and an unnaturally imposed order is one of the purest and most insidious roots of evil. I, however, meant the paper to be more spiritual in exegesis, as in the philosophy of the Taoists, whereby the freedom of every sentient being is nurtured and allowed to come to its gradual actualization when left to the devices of that which comes most compassionately and naturally to it. To attend to the scholarly merit of the paper, I researched indigenous cultures across the globe, making comparisons to so-called civilized societies. I suppose I was largely inspired by Rousseau and Voltaire's notion of the noble savage, as I had always, in accordance with my libertarian upbringing, felt a natural affinity and reverence for anything rejected or deemed unworthy of bourgeoisie, conformant, so-called polite society. I was a free bird and wished the same for everyone else, within a context which supported the promotion and honoring of human dignity and individuality, of course. My main thesis for the paper was that it is only when human beings are granted their fullness of being and actualization that this directly fosters not anarchy, as is the prevailing concern, but a more enlightened, naturalistic, and sincere, hence efficacious law and order within any given society. In other words, people are kind, industrious, and helpful to others because they want to be, not because it had been socially engineered into them since birth. For this was the kind of higher self that I had been cultivating within myself since the start of my edification in more metaphysical matters. Hence did it seem, due to the choice of inquiry in this particular paper, that I was coming full circle faster than I had ever thought possible. I was attending Mass regularly now, and on one particular Sunday, Father Ralph approached me and said that he had something he would like to discuss with me. At first I thought that some of the purloining antics of my yesteryears had finally been found out and had caught up with me. Yet, as we sat down finally in his back office, he instead just wanted to express his pleasure in seeing me attend Mass more regularly. He assured me that the Lord was doing a great work in me, and to not lose heart. Then he asked me something completely unexpected and flattering nonetheless. He had been taking diligent, almost fatherly notice of my activities in the writerly and artistic community, and had become well acquainted with some of my exceptional intellectual and linguistic abilities. Therefore, he asked me if I would be interested in participating a little more in some of the church services. I then asked him what specifically he had in mind, and he told me, as he was soon going to be going on a missions trip, would I be interested in assisting the substitute clergy in editing some of his sermons that he had prepared. I sat back for a minute and pondered this offer. Father Ralph then, sensing my hesitation, told me that perhaps I should pray to God about it and then get back to him, even as late as the Sunday of his soon-to-be departure was my final answer. But something struck a chord so resonant and deep and of such a rich timbre in me that my initial reticence faded just as quickly as it had crept up upon me, and I assented. He was overjoyed and assured me that this would prove to be a very blessed and worthwhile endeavor. I then left with a feeling of profound peace and bliss, which did indeed surpasseth all mortal understanding, and felt possessed of a clarity of mind which I had never experienced before. Now, finally, I was beginning to see just what it felt like to hear my own name called out by God himself. And this indeed was nothing short of a miracle. Yes, a choir of angels rejoiced in heaven, and for once I could truly believe that it was for me.